So thank you all for joining. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to our audience. So welcome to Creators Facing Climate Emergency. So my name is Stefano Vendramin, a curator in art related to environment. And this is a series of conversations that brings together the 18th edition, once a month, artists and scientists to discuss their work, as well as their thoughts and solutions regarding today's environmental crisis. And particularly topical since, as we know, thanks to the IPCC reports, we only have 3 years in order to curb our emissions and stay below 1.5 degrees and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So it's possible, but only with serious immediate action across all of society. And obviously this program is aiming to support this change. So the program is organized by the Fondation Thalie, an art foundation and artist residency based in Brussels, founded by Nathalie Guiot, curator, collector, and writer, who is here in our panel tonight. And at the moment at the foundation, little advertisement, we have an exhibition of Kiki Smith. So I hope you're able to visit if you're in Brussels. And today, of course, is a very special edition, as not only are we talking about Venice, which is a place dear to my heart, but and very current, given the opening of the Biennale next week, but also because we are joined by not our usual 2 guests, but 5 guests. So they are Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, founder and chair of the Foundation Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary, TBA21. Markus Reymann, director and co-founder of TBA21 Academy and its Venice-based art space, Ocean Space, sorry, lots of space, in the Church of San Lorenzo, beautiful, beautiful church. Hopefully you can visit that next week or even this week. The 2 exhibitions have just opened there. And Sonia Levy, artist and the winner of the European Commission Starts for Water Artist in Residency Prize, which is hosted by TBA21 and centered around Venice, where you are currently. And Jane da Mosto, environmental scientist, co-founder of the NGO We Are Here Venice, and author of numerous books, including The Science of Saving Venice, The Venice Report, and Acqua in Piazza. And of course, Nathalie Guiot, founder of the Fondation Thalie. So today, the object of today's discussion is Venice, which is, of course, a place of unique cultural heritage, which, as we know, is increasingly at risk from climate change. But also, it's a clear, perhaps also a symbol of the art world's own environmental inertia. So the discussion will last for an hour. Please don't hesitate to think about questions for our guests. You can leave them in the chat at any point, and there'll be a chance to ask them later on. And to start, I'm just going to go around the table and then we'll open up some wider questions. So Nathalie, to start with you, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the mission of your foundation and why you've launched this program, Parole de Créateurs face à l'urgence écologique, or in English, Creators Facing Climate Emergency. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Stefano, for organizing this amazing panel with Francesca, Markus, and Sonia Levy. I've been following your work for many years now, and it's a pleasure and an honor to share best practice and important issues together regarding the climate change we're facing. Personally, I have a background in journalism and publishing, and for the last 10 years, I have been developing this foundation dedicated to contemporary creation and open to the public in Brussels and soon in Arles, as I am now. And the idea is to support female artists and giving them increased visibility, and also highlight the dialogue between traditional savoir-faire and visual arts. And above all, what we are fighting for today, which is to promote the words and practices of artists engaged in the environmental transition. This is why this conversation today, why this format created in launch at the end of 2020 during the lockdown. I was wondering, what can I do with this foundation? What can I, how can I feel, how can I be useful? And I decided to create this format, sharing a point of view of as artists, viewpoints, imagination, and also mixed with the scientific rigor and foresight in order to create this new narrative that we really need, an action that can raise awareness in the art world. In parallel, I will take this opportunity to tell you about a new project with my family, the family business of Decathlon. I guess you know this company. I'm lucky to have been able to facilitate, for instance, the creation of an eco-design research share with the leading French University of Applied Arts in Paris, which will be inaugurated next September. And the subject is how we're gonna eco-design products tomorrow. And it will interest you because it's connected also with artists, designer, involved philosopher, economist, and I'm very proud to be part of this program. Aside from art, I've also chosen to become an associate of the European citizen-led fund called Time for the Planet, which through crowdfunding, finance the best innovations in the sectors of industry, energy, transport, agriculture, to decarbonize these sectors and enable us stay within the 1.5 range for the Paris Agreement. Anyone can be a partner in this fund, and any amount, and 10 million euros have already been raised with 40,000 associates taking part. And we are, of course, core investor in this fund, as well as Decathlon. And I think it's important to talk about it. And voila. So anyway, I'm sorry, I've been doing so many things in the same time, so I needed to write it down. So let's go back to Venice, where you are currently. I was so lucky to visit the very amazing exhibition of Joan Jonas at the Church of San Lorenzo in 2019, and I'm delighted to get to hear more about all what you are doing, all your research, and for the oceans and for Venice. It's an honor for us to welcome you on this platform. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other, from each of our initiatives, as both we are in the world of companies and in the world of art. And I think this change of mindset needed to prevent climate change will only happen through a coalition of actions. So thank you very much, Stefano, for this, make this possible. Voilà. And very curious to hear about your project.
Yeah, so thank you for this introduction, Nathalie. And it leads as well on to Francesca. So obviously there's many overlaps as well in terms of what Nathalie is doing with her foundation and her other activities, and what you've been up to for many, many years. Obviously your family has a long heritage of supporting the arts, particularly with the Musée Thyssen, the Thyssen Museum in Madrid. And so I wanted to know more about why you decided to particularly focus on this collaboration between artists and scientists, which is very present in TBA21, and also why particularly marine conservation is something that's very close to your heart.
Well, that's quite a lot to say wait. Okay, sorry, there's a lot to come across in 3 minutes, so I'll give it a shot. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm really, as Nathalie said, super excited to be in this dialogue, because often initiatives that seem parallel and similar don't have the opportunity to talk things out. So we're doing this in public, actually, which is even more exciting and challenging at the same time. But you know, I take a lot of inspiration from my father, because back in, it's now 30 years ago, he had a big dream, and that was peace on earth. And he wanted to do that at the height of the Cold War, where Brezhnev and Ronald Reagan were kind of at each other with the massive nuclear arms race. And the world was a very different place, very insecure place. Well, we're getting there again, actually, ironically, 30 years later. But, you know, in those days, he used cultural diplomacy in order to try and make a difference and to break down prejudices and open up a possible opening towards the Soviet Union at the time. And it was at a moment when he was bringing his collection into public domain for the first time and traveling it around the world that he got this request to show it in the Soviet Union, where no insurance policies worked. So it was really a pioneering gesture. And he ended up doing a 5-year collaboration with Soviet museums and showed his collection in not only Moscow and Leningrad, but also Novosibirsk and ironically Kiev. So, 20 years on, we are now 30 years on, we're finding ourselves back in a situation, but the difference that made at the time was phenomenal. And I traveled with him to the Soviet Union and actually could witness firsthand what an incredible change this represented in people's lives on both sides of the Iron Curtain. So when I founded TBA21 in Vienna back in now 20 years ago, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. We created a foundation that's really driven by artists and where the fundamental role and the belief that they can actually make a difference, and art and culture acts as a transformative power, but differently from my father, I worked directly with the artists and some very, very early on started commissioning works that really could make a difference with artists from Turkey dealing with Kurdish issues like Kurtul Gataman, all the way to more recently through the Academy, Jonas talking about overfishing in the ocean. So 10 years ago, I co-founded the TBA21 Academy with Markus, Reymann, who's also on this. And so that was really focusing a lot of work on all our attention on the ocean. So it was a focus that many people considered quite narrow at the time, but it wasn't until we dove in 10 years ago, literally, that we realized that the ocean is something that unites us all. And the idea of setting up Ocean Space in Venice had a lot to do with creating a pavilion that wasn't a national pavilion, where all this sort of national competition happens during these biennales, but something that binds us all together and also connects science to human issues, to indigenous ideas. So I think this was where a lot of the focus of the foundation, focusing on social and environmental issues, sort of really began to grow and become probably the strongest power in TBA21. And I wanted to give the opportunity for this to happen, to facilitate not only artists' dreams, but also Markus's dreams, and develop a program that was really unique of its kind. So, I guess some of this comes from my paternal instinct, my not instincts, but influence that I had from my father, but they materialize in many different ways. And obviously in the meantime, the collection is quite a handful and quite a beautiful. We've just opened an exhibition in Cordoba, showing some of the best treasures that we've collected over the last 20 years. And that's
I think we have some photographs, so maybe we can put some photographs and
sure.
the background. And Markus, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about TBA21 Academy and Ocean Space and what you set out to achieve with these projects.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I think first of all, it needs to be said that this is not my dream. No, I think one has to say, and it's not my achievement. It's an achievement of many, and the dream and vision developed is also a dream and vision that is contributed to by many. And I'm lucky enough to work with a fantastic team that is contributing daily to developing the vision, executing the mission, and so on. Obviously, you just got a very tiny and brief glimpse into the spirit of the organization that I serendipitously found my way into, and the belief really in art and culture as a transformative agent, or the possibility of art and culture as an integral part of transformation. So when Francesca challenged the organization just over 10 years ago, maybe 12, nearly 12 years ago, to imagine a different way of being, a different way, a different practice, a different way of doing things, because we found ourselves in a relatively dynamic and regular, I would say, in terms of calendar, exhibition, production, publishing schedule, right? And wanted to initiate a program that was specifically focused on the environment. The proposal was made to actually think from and with a system that is constantly moving, always fluid, always in flux, but intricately interconnected, and always changing. So the question was, can we think from and with change? Can we think from and with the ocean? That was the proposal. And can we stop making art for a moment? Both of those were accepted. And so we embarked on a journey where we would bring artists and scientists and environmentalists, legal experts, conservationists, and so on together for 2 weeks at a time on annual voyages, at least twice a year, to not produce, not get into this pressure of immediately capturing images and capturing this and doing this and having to develop and deliver something, but to engage with each other, engage with the places that we would go visit, and immerse ourselves in, with, and on the ocean, and actually ask, what is the ocean, right? And with that, we were looking at processes around science, processes around conservation, processes around policymaking, initiated 3 conservation projects. This is an image of ocean space on the current exhibition of Dineo Bopapa. So we initiated 3 conservation projects along the way, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and later on in Fiji. We became observers at the International Seabed Authority, so we inscribed ourselves into the policymaking process, and we developed a joint PhD program with the Max Planck Institute. So we were always keeping this ambiguity that it does not necessarily need to become art, although we are an art organization. It can become anything that the process demands. But after a while, the approach solidified into what is now attempting to become a methodology. The network grew, and so we thought it is time to bring this home and to bring this idea of, or test this idea of art and culture being a transformative agent in a specific community, in a specific context. Test this out.
Hence the space, ocean space in Venice.
Exactly. And that's
why,
how we came to
why
ocean
Venice
space.
in particular?
Well, for many reasons, and for many of them, Jane is a lot more, qualified to speak to. But Venice has this peculiar habit that it reflects on itself and the world through the lens of art every other year. Then through culture, through architecture. Venice has traditionally been on the intersection of exchanges, ideas, philosophies, religions, spices, goods, and so on. But until I would say the summer of last year, when Greece and Turkey was burning, when Germany, Belgium, and so on were flooded, it was also the iconic front line of at least sea level rise in Europe. And so therefore, Venice made a lot of sense to test this hypothesis. Can art and culture really be a transformative agent in a community, in a neighborhood, in a city, and a city that is floating in a lagoon?
Okay, we'll get to that a bit later then. Thank you. And so these are a bit of a preview of what some people have already seen or will see next week and onwards for the next coming weeks. So the two residencies at the moment, as well as, of course, the residency of Sonia. So Sonia Levy. So thank you for being here tonight. So Sonia Levy, you awarded the Starts for Water artist residency by the European Commission, and which is hosted at TBA21 and in Venice, which is around the Venice lagoons. Maybe we can show some photos as well about some of your previous projects, since we don't have photos yet of what you will make after this residency. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that in a second. And So you worked on two projects, one which was the project Coral. So we're working on, between 2017 and 2020, you followed Project Coral. So that's a project at the Horniman Museum in London that for the first time has managed to breed corals into captivity, from which you created the artist film For the Love of Corals. And after that, you created, more recently, Creatures of the Lines, an artist film that examines English canals, both from an ecological, but also a socio-political viewpoint. And that's in collaboration with Radar Loughborough and Aarhus University, so also two scientific communities. And also I invite the audience to check it out. Nottingham Contemporary are showing your film at the moment on their website. So if you're interested to see more of Sonia's work, please do check it out. And so to come back to Venice, it'd be great to hear more about why you decided to apply for this residency. What is it about the project that interested you? And how is it going so far? What stage are you at?
Yes, thank you, Stefano, and thanks for the invitation to speak about my work, my practice, and this ongoing residency, which is very much in its early days. So yeah, I'm here in Venice to think about the Venetian lagoon and to think about also current restoration project or a nature-based solution in relation to the futures of Venice's high waters. So yeah, the potential of such project to mitigate flood risk and water quality. I think one other thing that came to the front is also the sort of invisibility of the lagoon in regard to Venice as a city. And yeah, I think the Venetian lagoon is a really incredible space for me to think about histories of hydrological modification or yeah, Western waterscape changes and the way humans have changed and shaped the lagoon across time, its forms, its ecology. This for me is fascinating and incredibly interesting, and I'm sure Jane will know much more than I do about that particular history, how the changing of the lagoon since its early settlement.
It's a good time then to introduce Jane, and maybe we'll get back to the project in a moment. Just
okay,
sure. That's okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, of course.
And so Jane da Mosto, you're environmental scientist, environmental economist, and also the founder of an NGO, We Are Here Venice, who is doing lots and lots of activities to help Venice in the future. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you founded this NGO? What its purpose is?
Hello, hello everybody. We Are Here Venice is a combination of research group and activist platform, because after 20 years working as an environmental scientist, also on policy and European issues to do with sustainable development, and at the same time living in Venice for the part of that long space of time, I realized how difficult it is for the best available scientific information to go through into the actual policy making. And so that's what led me to establish We Are Here Venice. Also, it kind of mirrors my own everyday life in a way, because on the one hand, through my professional work, I realize how much we do know about what's happening and what can be done. But in my daily life, just as a citizen of Venice, it's so evident how the resilience of the local community isn't being incorporated in the decisions, and the all other information is there too that needs to be taken more into consideration. And so that's what we do. The other thing that I want to say straight away about We Are Here Venice that people sometimes overlook or don't realize is just how much hard work goes into doing what we do. And we are an NGO. We do, by definition, fill the gaps left by everything else. But the only way we can do that is through hard work and professionalism. And so I want to, say that whatever we do is the result of teamwork.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to, I guess, to set up a little bit, because we've talked a lot about Venice, and obviously there's problems that need to be resolved. And maybe you could tell us a little bit more, set up the story, or why Venice needs to be saved. What is the problem with Venice? And obviously we see the floods every year. They seem to be getting worse. I think 2018, 2019 were some of the biggest floods that the city has ever seen. I found this graph that I thought was interesting. It just shows how incredibly problematic, really, how the problem is getting worse every year. So
flooding is the first thing people think about when they hear the word Venice. I must say that it's for many years now that when I meet people, not in Venice, but when I'm traveling, they don't say how lucky I am when I say that I live in Venice. They say, oh my God, how do you survive there? And what this graph shows, the red line shows the increase in average water level, and the blue bars underneath show the increase in the frequency of flooding. The worst flooding for about 50 years was in 2019, but people should know that it's since the 70s that Venice started planning a flood barrier system, and the flood barriers did start operating. They're still on a trial basis. They're still, in the testing phase, but they did stop all but 1 or 2 floods in 2020, and there wasn't any serious flooding in 2021. I don't think now's the right forum for discussing, how good or bad the barriers are, but it is a new reality for Venice, that there is the possibility that acute flooding will be blocked. But what people also need to keep thinking about is the chronic flooding, the rise in average water level, the fact that water more frequently gets into the permeable parts of the building. And this is where I'm going back to your original question, which is, why did you ask why we should be saving Venice, something like that? Well, we should be saving Venice not because it's not owned, for lots of reasons, obviously. One can't, ignore the fact that Venice is unique, and, you don't want to lose something that's unique, that has so many, such a lot of inspiration and just pure beauty. You can't ignore the breathtaking beauty that you see wherever you turn your head in Venice. And it's not just the human civilization, the architecture, the paintings, the artisans' works, all these things come together, but it's also the nature that you see in Venice and the light that comes off the water at any time of the day. And all of this brings me to say that Venice is also important because of the complexity that it represents, and how it's like a test bed for solutions that can then be applied elsewhere. So there's lots of examples from Venice's long history of things that originated in Venice, and we'd like for Venice to carry on providing, ideas and inventions for the rest of the world going forwards.
Thank you. I think, as you said, Venice is almost an amazing story of adaptability. Now we're searching for how do we adapt to climate change, and Venice is a perfect example because it's adapted already. It's survived already so many hundreds of years intact.
The word I like to use is resilience. You know, there's some things about Venice that are still the same since 1,000 years, and there's other things that Venice has managed to change within that same unchangeable context. It's kind of the definition of sustainability too.
Okay, and thank you very much for sharing. And I think we all agree, obviously Venice is such a unique place. So to bring the discussion back a bit wider, it's not an easy question to answer, but how do you think, particularly I suppose Markus, Francesca, but maybe Sonia and Nathalie as well, what way do you believe that art and artists can help us face, you know, a problem like Venice or other, you know, major environmental problems as we are trying to do in some ways with the activities of your foundations and your work? It's a huge question, I'm sorry, but
Francesca, I give you the lead.
No, I think, Markus, you should answer this.
Look, I think you said it before, Stefano, we have 3 years left. No, why not try art? Huh? No, but this is not a good answer. I think Jane, please don't take this the wrong way, but we have to say the environmental movement in science has been telling us for 40 years that we're on a really, really, really bad track. One has to say that if this is the result of a campaign that we're where we are right now, that continents are burning, others are flooding, islands are sinking, and so on, this has failed spectacularly, right? So I think we are a storytelling species. We are a species that is built on relationships. We are a species that is in communities, and like Jane said, no, there is in coming together in diverse groups, we come up with fantastic ideas. And all of a sudden, dreams like Venice can become reality, right? So, but I do think that art and culture is a way of thinking and working and getting in touch with whoever gets in front of an artwork, right? That communicates or that interacts on a different level than purely information, right? And I think at this point, we need to be moved. We need to be inspired. We need to be maybe shocked and provoked to act. But we need to get going because the clock is ticking, and it's we have less and less time. I think it's not a question of one over the other. Absolutely not, right? It's all together, and art and culture are efforts to bring people together.
But can I just add? I mean, I don't think it's about one thing or the other failing or being successful. Is that fact that what we're discovering is that things come across so much stronger when they convene a multitude of disciplines, that what artists are able to do is actually focus on the gaps that are now becoming crevices between so many disciplines. And they're not illustrators of science at all, or communication tools. Artists have this phenomenal capacity to convene so many different people and do their research across so many different disciplines, and then come up with that type of narrative or inspiration that really then you start to realize what the problem is. I mean, what I would really like to see one day, a simple would be a massive iceberg floating through the Grand Canal, because personally, I've recently attended a number of polar conferences, and I became quite interested in the Antarctic through a work called The Antarctic Resolution that a fellow Venetian, Giulia Foscari, published last year. And the the scientists of polar science and research are equally frustrated, if not more, because they have been screaming about the melting poles and exactly what this represents to us, and is the single cause of sea level rise that we are so afraid of. And so not connecting the poles to Venice or to Tonga, for that matter, in the Pacific, and all of those Pacific islands that depend so much on very low ground, very few fertile square meters of land, you know, that is completely being overrun by seawater at the moment, to the point where even their heritage sites and their burial sites are disappearing, and their entire countries are meant to disappear by the end of this century alone. And all of that because we can't turn down the CO2 emissions that are global warming and melting the poles. And it is just, and I think that the issue has been until now that we've looked at and we've heard about science and we've heard about the, you know, all of these different, but somehow they're not being pulled together into something that we can relate to. Because either you're interested in science, or you're interested in the poles, or you're interested in the Mosa gates in Venice and its whole scandal and its corruption and everything else. But what actually matters is us understanding how all of these things are interconnected. And I feel very, very, very strongly about the potential, the power that artists have to tell these stories, to bring all these elements together, because they have only one vested interest, is to try and do their research and come up with a way of transporting these issues that even each one of them on their own are just too massive for any one of us to understand. I mean, the issues at hand that we're talking about are phenomenally massive and huge, and each person feels incapable of contributing to that, you know, changing of climate and so on. So I think they are really good at taking a global issue, which is sort of massive, explosive, intimidating, and turning it into something that you go, yeah, I hear that, I understand that I relate to, because it's in our ability to relate and not only empathize with these issues. And somehow artists have this incredible skill of floating around between all these different disciplines and telling the story and making the invisible visible. That's why I think it's so important that they play an increasing role. But in order for them to really be impactful, museums need to be free. There's nothing free in Venice. It costs an absolute fortune to go to any one institution in Venice. I mean, 20, 25 euros per person. Ocean Space is one of the few places which is free to the public and free to Venetians. And all our programming is there intended for Venetians as well. I mean, you need to really work with your community. This is how these issues suddenly start slowly coming across. Not if you have to pay 25 euros to go and be inspired. It's very uninspiring to have to pay a lot of money to enter a museum.
I suppose one of the solutions, like you say, is to do things that are outside of the museum in open spaces, and certainly what you mentioned there, the iceberg going down Venice. I mean, I suppose that's one of the, despite all the difficulties maybe we'll mention later about the challenges of having everybody come to Venice for a Venice Biennale or these kind of events. In some ways, it's an opportunity as well, really, to, as you say, to exploit the power of art to really change hearts and minds. I wonder if Jane or Sonia, or Nathalie, do you have anything to react to?
Yes, I'd like to add that it's also a way of changing our habits or behavior as individual, but also as global companies. And what do we want as growth? What is growth? Growth, you know, GDP responsible for the destruction of natural resources and we're not exempt of acting in institutions, cultural institutions. I'm thinking about also the art fairs. And I like what you say, Markus, about inviting artists not to produce, just to make a pause and to think, and not to have this injonction of producing. So it's a kind of it's very strong in our mentality it's capitalism. So it's we are talking, I'm actually following a course in Cambridge. They're talking about decoupling economy. So it's interesting. So how can we, have an economy more respectful? And I think, yes, artists are there to have this vision that we don't have. They have this vision. We had the chance to support the film of Cyril Dion, the filmmaker. He just made this film called Animal. I don't know if you have the chance to watch this movie. And the film is talking about the disparition of the 40 or 60% of the species, as you said. And my feeling is it's like we need a date, a precise date of a shift, and then we're going to move, but we don't have that date. We don't
need a date. We just need to stick to our promises. And the fact is, when COVID hit us all and we were all of us in this kind of retreat mode and lockdown and everything, and suddenly we were able to think again and work differently. And we learned we didn't need to be present at every meeting. We learned that we could be even more productive. And we learned how important being connected, even through Zoom, meant to our humanity. There were many ways of operating and living differently, and many pledges were made. And actually, the moment that you can take your masks off, everybody's back to square one, as if nothing had ever happened, and we're just gone right back. And I remember this incredible notion that Markus, remind me the name of the Indian writer. Can you remind me the Indian writer that I was always quoting, but I've just
Mehtav Ghosh? No, it was not. I know.
No, Amita. She wrote an incredible text at the beginning of the COVID and said that we are looking at a portal, an opportunity to go through, but we need to humble ourselves and actually shed all our baggage and be able to walk through this portal nearly naked and with a lighter step, not carrying all of the shit actually that we carry around with us, with our habits and the things that we're so used to. And we've just proven to each other that we have not ready to do those sacrifices and those changes. And I'm sorry, I don't think it's like having a deadline. And do you need a date, to
Arundhati Roy.
Arundhati Roy, thank you so much.
No, I mean about the date, it's just, for example, in terms of productivity or production, I'm thinking about India, South Asia. We know that these people will be displaced because of climate change. We all know. And I'm a board member of a sustainability committee, and I'm like you, saying things, with an expert from the GIEC, for people come and say, it's gonna happen this and this and this, and nothing happened. I mean, there's no decision. So that's what I'm saying. It's like, you've seen the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Stefano. Don't look up. Don't look up. You've seen the movie? No?
No.
Stefano, you can...
I heard it was a bit of a movie.
I wanted to hear from Sonia as well, since obviously we're talking about the power of art and related to artists. I wanted to hear, your perspective on some of the things that we've just talked about.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'd position myself differently, or from another point of view, is that I believe that art can create from modes of representation and attention that can enable us to think differently about our relationship to our environment. And I think that specifically in relation to how the West has a specific regime of vision that has traditionally really separated human from their environment, and for the most part, nature has been represented as something quite mechanistic and very passive and immutable. And I guess one of the aim of my work is to make tangible this notion that life forms are not passive, but they are important actors to that support and create the world, create the environment. So yeah, I guess I'm interested in how certain modes of sensing and visualizing and representing can both engage and engage us differently with the world.
Jane, did you have something you wanted to add, or?
Well, yes, of course I do. I'd like to say that I don't think we're in the problem, we're facing the enormous problems that we're having because of the failure of any kind of environmental movement or activists. It's because of the overriding power of existing systems, of the failure of the decision makers to make the right decisions. It's something that Nathalie mentioned, this decoupling of economics and the health of the planet. It's something also that Francesca is very frustrated by, and it's something I hear a lot. I'm very engaged in shipping, for example, and I hear the shipping executives say, of course sustainability is important, but they're thinking of economic sustainability as separate from the health of the planet. And what we know is that you can't keep them separate, because during COVID, nobody was pardoned, despite whatever economic power that they had. So that's the one thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say is also that, environmental art and speaking about the environment through art has been going on for a really long time. It's we're just getting much better at seeing it. And I just want to bring in the Biennale right now, because the Golden Lion is being awarded to Cecilia Vicuña, who is, I don't think she'll mind if I say her age, she's like in her 70s already. And up until just a few years ago, nobody was giving her any exhibitions or space or anything. It wasn't until the protesters in Chile were using her poetry on their placards in demonstrations that she started to get noticed. And I think, the more we work very closely with artists all the time, because we, recognize how they can help in putting messages across. My background's blurred, but otherwise you'd see some posters that we have that work. It's actually black writing on a white background, but that was a campaign that was conceived by an artist, using real science, but it was the artist's interpretation of the information to turn it into a plain message. And I admire everybody who supports, you know, the marriage of things. And the last thing I'll say is that as a scientist, it's an incredibly creative process as well, that art and science very much are doing the same things all the time. It's a question of choosing how to interpret, choosing what to look for. It's how you explain what you see, and that we're all doing the same things with under different labels.
Thank you. And you work, obviously you're working a bit with Sonia. You said you're obviously working with other artists. How do you facilitate that collaboration? How do you make that collaboration work? And then maybe it'd be interesting to hear from TBA21 as well, how and Sonia, how that collaboration works. How do we make that work, that collaboration, since it's obviously so necessary that we work together? Do you have a perspective on that, Jane? Or maybe Markus or Francesca, you want to?
I'll just say that we do what the artists, when we don't always have time for all the artists that get in touch with us. There's environmentally related art, and there's environmentally related art. I'm sure Markus, Francesca, and Nathalie are very good at distinguishing the kind of art that like uses environmental problems sometimes just as a platform. And we're quite sensitive to those kinds of projects, rather than, I must say, Sonia's type of work that really, through her work, we get to see things that we might not otherwise have noticed, and other people get to understand things, but I'll leave it to the others to explain it better.
Maybe for us, as I said earlier, it started really with engagement and bringing the different elements together. And it's not only art and science. No, the beauty of working over time with Jane is that Jane also she knows how to communicate across different disciplines. No, and I think this is very often the challenge, that there is not enough time, and that there needs to be immediately a product that comes out of it, and immediately artists need to translate information, scientific information, that kind of that is given to them, or let's say an experimental process where they're invited to artists in residencies, in labs, in hugely complex situations. No, and to be able to turn something around in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks, and make something that is meaningful and not just illustrative, right? Where both sides can actually profit. I think it needs time, it needs engagement, it needs a constant also facilitation of this conversation, right? There's frustration, there's limits. We use very often the same words that mean completely different things, right? And I think Sonia, the way that Sonia described her practice and the possibility or the offering that art can make is really not to be underestimated. No, what art can bring into that context, because very often they're trained critical thinkers. They engage with systems in a very special way. But at the end of the day, it's like Jane said, the starting point is a very similar starting point. No, the process is different, but very often things are made to be made visible that are otherwise haven't been visible. No, I think they've been thinking about and imagining that black holes existed for 60 years before they could actually prove it. No, but so this is a creative process. No, to actually prove that black holes exist. And I think there's a lot of science that is actually doing exactly that. No, it is making the invisible visible, and so it is process, time, translation, facilitation, all of these things. Care.
Sonia, maybe how do you feel about that? Do you agree? And I guess it's interesting, Markus, you talk about making the invisible visible, but also making the invisible audible is something that you've done a lot at TBA21, and it's something that's also important to Sonia's practice. Perhaps, Sonia, we'd like to react to.
Yes, sure. Thank you. No, what I would say about collaboration, I mean, of course, it depends on every context, and but in the context of the work we're doing here, I think it takes, of course, a lot of time, a lot of discussion, a lot of finding common ground and understanding each other and being challenged by each other as well, and accepting that. And what I think is going to be very important also about this project is that it's not just another extractive project about Venice that takes Venice's appeal and goes away with it, but how with this project will talk about the people it concerns. And I hope this is something that we would be able to discuss with Jane as the project develops.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question from the audience already. I think I'm guessing it's for TBA21. How do you measure the impact of your program and the additional impact through art?
You know, it's a very difficult question, right? Because we're talking about slow and systemic processes, no? And obviously one can measure impact through figures, right? How many visitors through the door, how many views on a website, how many likes on social media and all of that, and you can pretend that is impact. Maybe that's awareness, right? Maybe that's something different. The challenge of really measuring impact is that you actually need to stick with a community over a long time and go back and back and see if something has actually changed. So we're trying to create impact measurement processes for our work, and the second part of the question. Well, oh no, wait a minute, it's been answered. The second and the addition impact with the art. So does art have more, or does art add to the impact? It's not. I mean, it's very hard for us to say because we're an art organization. So we're not a campaigning group, or we're not a policy a lobbyist group or so on. What we can say is that art is a way to bring people together and to mobilize people, right? And I think that is important. And art is a way to build relationships to amongst people, but also as Sonia said, to the environment. And we are part of the environment. No, I mean, this is like we have to stop thinking us as separate, right? And we have to think a lot more about what Nathalie said earlier, degrowth. No, I mean, this one universal myth of constant growth, and yet everything will be good is like that's a difficult one.
We're gonna.
I think we are in the same. We're invited in the same seminar at the end of September in Milano, with about this question of sustainability. Markus, it's led by World Art Foundation. No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's so far out. It's not on my radar yet.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot to do.
And touching on what you just said, so next week obviously is the Venice Biennale. So what should we be doing next week? Or next week, or over the next few months that the Venice Biennale is happening? What can we do to enact change to help the story of Venice, and to help the art world, I suppose, move forward? should we even have the Venice Biennale? Does it make sense anymore to have all these millions of people debarking, arriving on an island, which is always the same size? I mean, how do you feel about, big question, but how do you feel about that? What should we be doing next week or the following months? What can we do in Venice?
I think the Biennale is super important because it has historically brought a lot of attention to artists that are, emerging or, coming out, and given them a great opportunity to show their work. And, it's not to be confused with art fairs. And I think biennales are a critical part of our culture. And I think without them, we'd just be completely lost in commercial activities in the art world and driven from event to event. And, I wish it did bring millions of people. It doesn't, and that's the big issue with the Biennale and the budget at the end of the day. But I think it's critical because it also brings together a lot of other activities. I mean, there's the collateral program, which is have to pay 25,000 euros to be part of. And then there's a lot of other art institutions that, open up, a few weeks before, like Ocean Space does, and who play a different role in the social impact of and the civic society of the city that they're in. Similarly, what we're trying to achieve in the same line in Cordoba in Spain. And I think this is something where you bring together critical culture, you invite artists, they do performances, they engage, you series of talks and activities. It's not as event driven as one sees it, and at the end of the day, we all need to collaborate much closer together. And I think that's where the importance of this Biennale in Venice. Otherwise, it would just be run over by tourists, by the millions. And I think at least it brings a critical mass of people that actually are interested and are, committed to contemporary art. I think it's really, I think that's it's also the people that it brings together. And the people that you can meet while these things are happening. I don't know, I'm a fan.
Jane, I want to hear your opinion as well. And I know you talked about something very interesting together when we talked about earlier about also the story about the pavilion and being able to reuse objects. And maybe that's something also interesting to mention.
Well, it's just, I think that the main take-home message for any of these kinds of conversations is the complexity of everything. And there's no one answer. It's not no Biennale or all the Biennale. It's all these things. It's how you do it, not what you do. And of course, there's a huge value in having this global collection of art and viewpoints. There's my friend Mary, who I see every art biennale because she comes to Venice from Oklahoma, where she has a very restricted view of the world, and she stays in Venice for 2 or 3 months, and she methodically goes through the art pavilion by pavilion, and she's chosen the art to be her lens, and then how that spreads out through Mary's web of life to everybody else in the United States is incredibly worthwhile. And so when I think we're getting close to the end, and I'm going to say my final thing now, make it simple, is that you said, is there one action that you want to recommend or advocate for? And I think the main thing that's also come out here is people need to accept the complexity of everything, and it's the first thing I learned when I was studying environmental sciences, is you need to use your own head to weigh up all the different types of information and make up your mind. There's no one answer to things. You need to be conscious and aware.
Maybe just to follow up on Jane and
yeah, so effectively, for the audience, effectively I asked everybody in the panel to come up with one way in which people from the audience can take away, one action that they can start doing from tomorrow in their own lives. So Go ahead, Markus.
Just to follow up on Jane, and I think it's a beautiful story, no, about the impact that art can have, no, for someone that dedicates a certain part of the year or every other year to come to Venice and see it. I think the beauty of, or the privilege of being a co-conspirator, collaborator of Jane's is that she actually also makes an effort that this tremendous quality of thinking and practice that comes and converges in Venice actually has a residue in Venice, no? That it's not something that is separate, that comes and visits and leaves again and then leaves a pile of trash, no? But actually that it has an impact and an influence on Venice. And if that is actually possible, then Venice as a laboratory of the future, with this incredible magnetism that the city has, with this kind of manifestation of fever dreams to make it possible, no? And then these incredible ideas and visions that are made manifest through artworks, right? If they become actually, or if they leave residue in Venice by having an effect, no, I think that's incredible. And if one action to do, go volunteer. I think we talk a lot about care. We think a lot about care. We talk a lot about community. We think a lot about go create community, volunteer, join Jane's efforts, and with We're Here Venice, if you can, you know, it's like, I think that's important.
Markus, who else wants to share their one? Francesca?
Yeah, I had been thinking about this, and I think the way I've learned the most of my life experience has been pushing myself constantly out of my comfort zone. I think people are far too reticent to go there, preferring to stay in a comfort zone where they feel they can perform better, they're more confident, that there's so much more and stimulus as well as challenges, and we all learn through those challenges so much more. So out of your comfort zones, 100%, and don't look back.
Sonia, Nathalie? It can be, if it's one action or one, if otherwise one inspirational sort of reading or something to watch to take away for our audience.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to recommend a book, which is quite a big book, but it's really beautiful. It's The Invention of Rivers by Dilip Da Cunha, who's an architect. And for me, it's been really inspiring because it talks about the separation of land and water. And although it doesn't speak specifically about Venice, I think it's an interesting book to think about Venice as well.
Who is it by?
Dilip Da Cunha. I can write it in the chat, actually.
Please. Oops.
And me, I recommend this book of Satish Kumar. I don't know if you heard about this activist, Indian activist called Satish Kumar. He actually built this community, amazing community in 1 hour from London called the Shoemaker College. I don't know if you heard about it, Sonia. And it's a mixed on, you know, being there, present. He traveled all his life. Is a kind of, you know, a monk, but he's doing a lot with this with this school where you can learn how to different paths to change your habit, your connection with the biodiversity. And I had the occasion to meet him, and well, I was really impressed. And I agree with Markus, go volunteer. So I think I'm gonna visit you, Jane, as I'm coming next week and learn more about your project.
So thank you. So I think we have 2 books and 3 actions.
What about you, Stefano?
Oh no, I'm not here to share.
Stefano,
Oh, come on.
Allez,
That's
Stefano.
not acceptable.
I refuse. I need to think about it.
No. You
Outside
came
of your
up with the
comfort zone.
question. You
Come on.
must have thought about it yourself.
I actually haven't. I think we have enough inspirational actions from what you all that we can all follow. So I think we're around out of time, but thank you all for this very beautiful conversation. I didn't get a chance to share. I wanted to share some of Sonia Levy's project, Creatures of the Lines. I didn't manage to share it, but for those watching, you can go on the Nottingham Contemporary website this week and watch her work in full. Otherwise, I'm sure it'll be on show another time. Maybe you want to share any other activities that you are up to for the audience. Anything? Obviously, Ocean Space, 2 exhibitions are just opened that we can see next week.
Dineo Bopape and Diana Policarpo. Yeah, and we have the fantastic residents, and we have a beautiful fellowship that is currently taking place in Venice.
Okay.
Sonia, any exhibitions of your work coming up?
Well, we'll do, I think we are planning to do an event mid-June around the project with the other resident as well. So
In Venice, fantastic. And Jane, anything coming up in the next few weeks?
Just more of the same. The cruise ships are coming back to the lagoon, so people shouldn't be deceived that just because they're not coming through the heart of Venice, all the problems have been solved. They've just been moved somewhere a little bit less visible, with a lot more complex, not even complex, a lot more obvious issues that are going to be very bad for the city and for jobs. And so stay tuned.
So maybe an iceberg really is the solution that might deter them.
Well, if they can crash into one, like they can all crash into one iceberg, that would fix it and sink. That's just an example. Just one last thing. It's not Venice that's the problem as regards the cruise ships. It's the industry and the ships, and that's where Venice comes into its own, because it's like the litmus test for what needs to happen everywhere else. Sorry.
Thank you.
Very nice. So I invite you all to follow We Are Here Venice, of course, TBA21, Ocean Space, Sonia Levy, and of course the Fondation Thalie. Our next talk will be on the 17th of May with Natsuko Uchino and Marc-André Selos. Natsuko is an artist and Marc-André Selos is a biologist specialized in soil and mycelium. So that will be the topic of that conversation. So stay tuned for that. And I wish everybody a wonderful evening and hope to see you all very soon.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao.